Well, hello there, amazing students, and welcome to week 3. This is Dr. J. I am excited to jump into the week. Things tend to go very quickly in these classes, and we're almost to the halfway point. So make sure you're staying focused, your intent. Do make sure to read through all the instructions at least twice. That's always a good thing to do. And certainly we need to make sure to validate our arguments with the appropriate research. So I want to go through some of the submissions this week to just talk about some of the nuances, give you guys a couple of tips and insights. Do please reach out to me if you do have any questions before you proceed. I don't want any students to put a lot of time and energy into something and just be completely off track. So let's dive into it. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview as we get into this stuff. So do make sure we're going to start with the Module 3 overview, if you will. Make sure that you're going through here to look at the introduction and the resources. Most specifically, as we talk about the resources, this week we're going to be focusing on what is your why. And if you pay attention to the text as I put on this announcement, this is an area that I am very well versed in as we talk about our wheelhouse. Helping students to find their why is definitely within my wheelhouse. In fact, I've taught over 100 classes on psychology of motivation, which specifically one of the big topics that we address is finding your why. So do work through these materials this week. Pay attention to the videos, pay attention to the articles so that you're up to speed on what it is that we're talking about this week. And as I always tell students, we don't always know if you all are reading the articles and watching the videos directly, but we often know indirectly as the submissions sometimes take a little bit of a hit. If you guys aren't reading this stuff on a regular basis or working through these materials, it might be a little bit off base in terms of your submissions. You're also going to find that your submissions are just a bit harder. So make sure that you're paying attention to this stuff as you tackle the week. Let me first talk about the milestone for the week, and I want to provide some clarification on these things in terms of grading. So let me stress, the milestone is worth, each one of these submissions is worth about a third of your grade for the week. You have 3 submissions this week, but they're slightly different in terms of their point allocations. The milestone is actually 26 points. It's the smallest, although it probably is going to take you the most time and energy. So one of the things that I want you to really think in terms of is when you go about this, we say for this assignment, respond to the following criteria in 3 to 5 sentences each, citing your sources in an APA style. So I encourage all students to submit all of your coursework in an APA format or an APA style. The reason for this is going to give you a little bit of an opportunity to practice. And if I catch something, I might make a note or give you guys some coaching on some of these things so that you can improve your performance just on your formatting. This might not be a big deal in some of the submissions. A lot of these submissions won't have any grading specific to the format or the style, but it just gives you an opportunity to practice and me an opportunity to give you a little bit of feedback because it is something you're going to have to do often. And those students who are moving on to graduate school, every submission you do in graduate school will require that format. And sometimes the point penalties for missing small things might be bigger in future classes. So keep that in mind as you're moving through your submissions. As we talk about this one, as it says, 3 to 5 sentences. So let me be very clear on this. You need to address the question. You need to answer the questions of the prompt. You need to make sure you have enough content in there that fully addresses the question, regardless of how long it is. In my experience of grading the submissions this past week, maybe a handful of students did well truncating their responses, and several students didn't write enough content to fully answer the question. So I would set your sights on roughly 5 sentences. Think in terms of a good sized paragraph for each one of these. Describe how you would apply a specific theory of social psychology to advance your advocacy agenda. Again, write a nice big paragraph that addresses this. And I also want you to think in terms of each one of these paragraphs should be in a separate block. You don't necessarily need to have space in between. You may, if you choose, put the question on the top, but think in terms of that question is not part of your answer. So in other words, don't start out by saying, describe how you would apply blah, 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 then put a second sentence next to it and a third sentence and think you're done. You might be. I'm not saying you can't, but do make sure that you fully address the question. Don't think in terms of, I have 3 sentences, especially if the first one is the question itself and you're complete. Again, I want to stress this. Make sure you fully answer the question. Also, each and every one of these, as we're talking about social psychology theories or cognitive psychology or whatever the case might be, may have more than one answer. In fact, in many cases, they're going to have several responses that are appropriate. So make sure that you're validating your response by adding the research. This is what I believe it to be. Actually, let me back up. Make a declarative statement. This is what it is. This is why it is what it is. Here's the research to support it. If you do that, you're going to be well ahead of the game in terms of grading and very well on track with your submissions. And again, if you started with the reading, you're already going to be armed with a lot of this information. Let me move on to the journal activity. So in the journal activity this week is similar in terms of your writing 3 to 5 sentences. Again, make sure that you fully address the question. Don't be thinking in the mindset of, I only have to write 3 sentences. Okay, it could be 4, it could be 5. It might actually even go to 6. In psychology, we tend to go a little bit longer with our written submissions. So I want you guys to be thinking in that mindset. I don't want you to write 10 or 15 sentences, but a good sized paragraph around 5 sentences is probably enough to answer each one of these questions. But do make sure you answer it fully. And again, make sure you're supporting your arguments with the research. Everything we're doing in these submissions should be supported by the research. I think the question, if you all have a question about whether or not you need to include references, the answer is always yes, okay? Everything we do, even though some of these might look like a personal opinion, you're going to weave your personal opinions, your observations in with the research. Make sure that you're doing that. Finally, the last thing that we're going to address this week is the video reflection. The journal, by the way, is worth 30 points. The video reflection is worth 34 points. Folks, I'm just the messenger. I don't make up the rules to the game, and I honestly am struggling to understand how it is that the shortest submission is worth the most amount of points. The largest submission is worth the fewest amount of points. But what this tells me is I want you folks to watch the video, think, ponder, reflect on some of the statements that are being addressed, and then you're going to answer these questions. And again, it talks about 2 to 4 sentences. Be thinking closer to 4. Maybe you even go 5. But again, this should be 2, average size paragraphs that fully answer the question. And again, always support your response. You're going to make an analysis on what you believe the theory or what you believe to be the answer, and then you're going to support that with the research. Always do that. So again, I do encourage you all to submit in APA format. That gives us an opportunity to kind of look and just point you in the right direction if you're a little bit off. You don't have to worry. There's not going to be any points lost if you mess up on your formatting, or if you choose not to submit in that format, you're going to be okay. But a couple of things to do keep in mind moving forward. There is a reminder at the end of this module to be mindful that we do have a significant project that will be due next week. And these submissions right here will be part of your first project, which will be due at the end of next week. And then we're going to start building on, or kind of the foundation of information, if you will, for the next project. So be mindful of that. Take a look at these things as you move throughout the week. This is what you'll be looking at for your project next week. And again, this is going to be somewhere in the range of about 2 to 3 pages worth of content. As it talks about, you've got 5 direct questions here, and it talks about writing a paragraph for each one of them. So again, probably in the 2 to 3 page range is what you're looking at. But again, think about expanding your thoughts, adding the research to validate your statements. Do make sure that you proof, edit, and those types of things as well. And again, if you have any questions about anything that's going on this week, please feel free to reach out. This is Dr. J. I look forward to working with you this week on your submissions, and I look forward to grading them at the end of the week. Everybody take care.